Listen up, I'm devoting an entire video to a newsy thing. It's necessary and a fresh, kind of nice change of pace. Lord knows I need a change of pace. I didn't describe any of the gory, gruesome details, primarily because I don't want to have the video taken down because of that. I flashed some almost gory headlines, a bit blood here and there, but for the most part, I keep it clean. But not because I think it's wrong to indulge in those kinds of exposés. It's important to document what exactly happened in all the gruesome details. But because I guess I'm too concerned with the video being taken down, should I do that? Whether in terms of what I say or what I display on the screen. The first thing I'm doing is linking to a wonderful piece on the National Post. Don't much care for the National Post, but I'm going to link to it because whoever it was that wrote it, I forget her name, but she points out how, the media is cowardly for using soft terms and for not just this whole decade-long, it's several decades now, habit of coddling the population by, all these warning signs and all these kinds of things that, disclaimer. They're not even showing the worst of it. They're showing milquetoast stuff, but they're saying this may be too gruesome for some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. That old habit has to go. She makes the point brilliantly. It's the first thing I'm going to link. But I'm not flippant. My tone may sound flippant, but that's just compared to what you may be used to in terms of all these public officials who make these, remorseful sounding declarations. You just got to understand that that's just, they're courting swing voters and things of that nature. So that's why they strike that ultra somber seeming posture. So it's only compared to them that I seem overly energetic, I guess. And that creates a lighthearted mood because energy is lighthearted, at least the way I do energy. And I'm outside, as you'll find out based on the wind. The wind simmers down after about a minute or so. It doesn't go away fully, but it's kind of rough in the first minute, but you can hear me at every point. The video was just all outside, and so that just means more shouting and stuff like that. Plus, I had just recently left my old man's place and we got into a kind of heated argument, so I was still kind of axing my grind around that. And it's not a tangent, by the way, when I pivot into talking about the Balkans. It's very relevant because the term I don't go on to use, but that I should have used within the rant, is I'm a territorial apatheist, right? To the extent that I care about territory and the integrity of territory, it has to be in the form of my own territory, so my own property. That's the only territory I care about. But these grouped concerns over territory, especially stretching back centuries or millennia, and people who wronged each other being dead, individuals who wronged each other all being dead, but somehow the implications of that, like you got to be a ethnic essentialist to buy into those kinds of narratives as crafting how we should look at individuals who wrong each other in 2023, right? It's like somehow it matters, but it's like to the extent it matters, nothing can be done about it because they're all dead. This really only works as one of those strike while the iron's hot commentaries, but I probably won't upload it as soon as I record it, knowing me. But the reason I say strike while the iron's hot is because the Hamas thing happened yesterday. Hamas saw fit to carry out a really well-coordinated terrorist plan, executed, as far as I've read, damn near to perfection. I'm just watching the blowback, the rhetorical blowback. It's the day after. This happened yesterday, so this really only works as strike while the iron's hot, but I know I won't because I hate uploading short, bite-sized commentaries for entire videos, but this absolutely won't fit with anything else I was planning to talk about in my next video, so I don't know how I can justify making this timely, but who knows, I just might upload it standalone. Because the Hamas thing happened yesterday, reading all the blowback, no one comes right out and DQs these lines, these regurgitations that are really just these, kind of, sometimes they're factual, but they're really just these lines that people spew and regurgitate. Something, grievance and Palestinians. I've just summarized it, right? Something, grievance and Palestinians. This leads to a kind of moral entitlement or a moral whataboutism. Some merger of entitlement and whataboutism, where instead of talking about what actually happened, people flash charts like these. I snapped it the moment I saw it. I haven't vetted it to see whether it is factually true, but how do you even vet something like this? What's the rigorous method? What's your street epistemology on how you vet something like the history of, who's done it worse? Israelis to Palestinians or Palestinians to Israelis? I mean, I'm sure many people believe there's an absolute procedure for this, a fail-safe procedure, a fail-proof procedure. And I'm sure the procedure that they go by leads them to believe one of the following, that indeed Palestinians have done worse to Israelis than have Israelis to Palestinians. And in the overwhelming majority of those cases, those individuals just happen to be of a Jewish background. And the exact same can be said for the Palestinians. So there's these all too convenient regurgitations of sometimes factual, but hard to vet, but presented as factual things. Whether or not this chart is factual, it absolutely doesn't justify pivoting away from the recent thing, the very recent thing that we are justly discussing at this time, because it hasn't even been 24 fucking hours. You can't pivot to your history lesson, whether it's factual or not, because we're talking about individuals who you, I guess, believe are morally entitled, right? We're talking about the actions certain individuals saw fit to commit, certain crimes certain individuals saw fit to commit yesterday because they felt themselves morally entitled along the lines of group identity. And no one comes right out and DQs all this stuff by referring to how group identity is really beneath everyone. I just tried to bring it up to my old man. I just left this place, and I'm bringing this stuff up, and he's just lambasting me. He's accosting me because he's always known that I've been apathetic as it relates to the situation in the Balkans, but he just has these strong views. Coincidentally, he's got the pro-Serbia is Kosovo, Kosovo is Serbia views, and he can spout off a long list of facts, as can the typical Albanian, to justify the current legal order. All these people, the more they're convinced of the facts that they spout and how those facts are decisive in the discussion, there's a strong correlation. The more they're duped by the notion of group identity, the more their group identity takes over them as individuals, and thus the more they feel themselves individually morally entitled to either carry out these horrific acts or to pivot away from these horrific acts in the heat of a discussion not even 24 hours removed. This was Terrorism 101. You want to talk about the history of the region? Maybe give it a couple of weeks and start for once in your pathetic, low-resolution lives. Start viewing things under the lens of individualism. Start viewing moral culpability under the lens of individualism. Start viewing yourself as being more dignified the less you care about group identity. What happened when I brought this up to my old man? He just immediately pivoted away to discussing Kosovo. It's like, I don't care about the Balkans. I have no views on the Balkans, apart from the fact that the Balkans are reprehensible, because this is exactly where, this is yet another pocket of the world where there could have been so many great thinkers had they just been able to think outside the box of group identity. But it's too much of an allure, because the flattery, that kind of folk lore that really convinces because it flatters. It convinces for no other reason apart from the fact that it flatters. You know, whatever you want to say about the Constitution as a great document, the American Constitution, a lot of people believe it because it flatters them qua ancestry. We see it in America too. We see it in the Balkans. I'm accosted for not having views either way, for not even being interested in doing a deep dive into this Kosovo situation that's heating up again now. It's like, I just don't care. It's happenstance that those are my origins, that part of the world. It's absolute happenstance. And all of you who, the stronger of a view you have, the more you're duped by group identity, and the more you belong to the group that is always purporting itself to be aggrieved, like the Serbs are by the current legal order of it no longer being Kosovo, but Kosova, and it being Albanian territory, it being sovereign. I have no views on this region, apart from the fact that it is utterly reprehensible. As are the Palestinians, who are rationalizing this away right now because of their group identities. Now, needless to say, I don't mean all Palestinians or even most. It's hard to know what the facts on the ground are in terms of what is actually believed. the foolishness I'm seeing is really these Western Muslims, no matter their nationality, but there have been these few rallies across a few cities, most prominently Toronto, New York, right? The mayor, Adams, had to issue a tweet, not had to, I'm sure he wanted to, but, just condemning the rallies, the pro-Palestinian independence rallies. I believe there were some in London. And, people are losing their shit about that in a way that seems to me more furious than the attacks themselves, kind of the backlash that I'm seeing. It's that, essentially Muslims living in the West are exercising their free speech, which we should always view it as free speech. If you say you have a steadfast commitment to free speech, it very much applies to these rallies, unless it's incitement, but it's not always incitement. It's just they're fools. They can't see how Hamas, it's not going to get them anywhere closer to their goal being Palestinian independence. This is the thing they want to if their goal is independence and the end to apartheid, Hamas is the last thing they're going to want to support. But here they are, these three cities I've mentioned, a few other cities that escape me off the top of my head, and they're so stupid, they're so emotionally wedded to the group identity that they can't think even just strategically. Strategically, it's so clear that Palestine is not one further step toward freedom now than they were prior to October 7th. No, they're ever further. And now there's casualties more in Gaza because of this. But see, they're just completely deranged. And to me, yes, a part of this is the notion of there being such a thing as Holy Land. So religion will always be a part of this story. But group identity just might be an even bigger part of this story. And all these statements about how this didn't happen in a vacuum, you can talk about all this, but you just do really have to understand that it's counterproductive. Your sights should first and foremost be set on Hamas itself in terms of just condemnation, and then on those which seems to be Western Muslims who are gathering up and speaking out as they have a right to, but nonetheless failing to see how they're shooting themselves in the foot, insofar as thinking that this was in any way productive, what happened on the 7th. But yes, instead they think they're here to teach people who don't know all the facts, to teach them about the facts by uttering things like, well, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. I'm sure people understand that there's a long history to this region. But in terms of just what is productive and counterproductive, that's the black and white story. And it's just amazing, these rally goers failing to understand that it's all counterproductive. There's not one trace of productivity toward anything like a two-state solution stemming from this. And so I don't care how jaded you are, you should be able to see how it's counterproductive. And they just seemingly can't. But then also I'm just kind of disappointed that, more often than not, when I see calls to curb this kind of heinous speech or just to chill it, it is coming from Jews, which again, is what deceives them. It's the notion of group identity or fear. But they should be able to see past it. They should not be that unnerved such that their otherwise steadfast commitment to free speech, even in the worst cases, right? If we don't believe it for our enemies, then we don't believe it at all. Well, it appears that you don't believe it at all, insofar as you're calling for these groups to be deported simply because they have vile opinions. The rally groups. I wish I had recalled exactly what they call themselves, specifically the ones in Toronto. Are they just kind of foot soldiers for Hamas, like rhetorical foot soldiers for Hamas? Or is it something more? Are they part of that organization CARE? Or what exactly is going on here? I forget. Or it could just be a loosely unaffiliated group of people who just gathered up. They don't necessarily have to be part of any organization. They can just be ordinary people who are kind of low-key celebrating what happened and are too dumb to realize it's counterproductive to their end to do so. So I'm seeing fault lines every which way, as I tend to do. But the overriding thing to point out here is that it's so antlike, right? I'm not even saying by abandoning group identity, then there will therefore be, peace on earth. There'll be a lot of contests. Even once everyone, hypothetically, is capable of abandoning... I have to step in because the lot that was abandoned is no longer abandoned, so I can't continue doing this in that lot. I'm back in the lot now. It is abandoned again. I use the word abandoned twice in a narrow span of time for different things, which I hate doing, right? I say abandoned group identity, and then I say, oh, the lot's no longer abandoned, I have to step in. So I hate that, but I'm gonna leave it in because no one cares about that but me. No one even notices it but me until I point it out. I need to keep things in that are only my pet peeves that no one else really cares about. I need to learn to keep those kinds of things in. So where was I? Yes, the antlike thing. It just seems they seem so at home in these rallies, waving their flags. I have a term. I didn't come up with it, but I will appropriate it here. I have a term called flag it for all the flag wavers who just don't notice how demeaning it is to be just that kind of foot soldier without realizing that this was counterproductive, all of it, for those who want an independent, for those who want an end to Israel, so to speak. But yeah, I don't want our Overton window to budge based on this. Well, I do want it to budge because it's too narrow, but from the standpoint of it being constrained ever that much more, like I still think that, it's not a short line between someone who uses the word Zionist, and I don't believe in any of the Zionism stuff. I don't go in on it. But when I see someone bring up certain things and use the word Zionism in an unflattering way, I don't immediately get the penchant to have them not allowed to post anything on the internet. I'm interested in what kind of a response that type of person will have to the kind of things I say. And that's just I don't know. There's an appetite to read a lot into anyone who uses the word like Zionism. And as in, it's like a short line between that and Holocaust denial. And like it's a short line between Holocaust denial and incitement, violence against Jews incitement. And I don't think it is. Because of course with incitement, that's kind of the areas where speech should be curbed. Because then it's, in line with the harm principle. You can curb speech on those grounds of incitement. It's just there's too many people, and I'm sorry to say Jews, in the aftermath of this atrocity, who are now kind of pushing for that. Yes, it is a thin line between Zionism, Holocaust denial, and incitement of violence against Jews, and I just think you have to prove that. You can't. It's an impossible thing to prove. I can always show you examples to the contrary of individuals who have used these terms, who are even flat-out Holocaust deniers, but who clearly, they're not, nowhere in their internet history have they done anything close to incite violence against Jews. But you think you're so much more clever by saying, oh, but it's always coded. It's like, I see so many horrible things said about Serbs because this Kosovo thing was heating up again, and it's like, I don't take it personally. There's nothing like an ounce of fear. And you might want to say, well, that's because there's no historical precedent for atrocities against Serbs. There is. Coincidentally, as with the Jews, there is. And it goes back to the 40s. But I view it all in such impersonal terms. And I view the rest of you who are incapable, whether you're the dupe who's cheering on what happened because you think it's going to get you closer to your independence goal, or whether you're worrying out loud and wanting to change the Overton window, constrain it even more. I view it all as this ant-like conduct, and I just think all of you need more of an individualistic ego, right? I both have an individualistic ego, nothing in the way of group identity. I can see how this didn't happen in a vacuum, but that's not the story right now. The story right now is individuals chose to perpetrate atrocities. And those individuals ought to be blamed for it, and whoever else coordinated alongside with them. You don't have to actually perpetrate it, you have to assist in the coordination of it as well. So in a nutshell, Hamas. We ought to all point our fingers at Hamas right now. There's a time and a place for a history lesson, how things don't happen in vacuum, blah, blah, blah. But that's not right now. And I just wonder, I always cared in terms of my win-loss record in sports I always cared so much more when there was these sports, there's just one-on-one, right? So tennis, things of that sort. When I would play basketball and soccer and these team sports, right? I was into it, but to the extent, the more players there were on my team and on the opposite team, the less of a effect I can have as just one individual in terms of determining the final score. And so the less badly I felt when my team lost, and the less good I felt when my team won, unless I was like the star of unless I won the OT goal or something. But when I really did care in terms of just sports, it's when I was playing those one-on-one sports without teammates. And when I just had the one opponent. Those one-on-one contests, just from as early as I can remember, probably even before the age of reason, I just had this baked into my psyche. That my ego, to whatever extent I'm going to have an ego, it's going to be an individualistic one. And I just never heard anyone make that point. Like, do you think this is a proxy for a kind of psychometric individualism versus collectivism thing? Those people who, they're more at home playing team sports, and it's not necessarily going to be the case that they're going to feel less good about a victory and more bad about a loss when it's one-on-one. But even just feeling it evenly, to me, I think that's like I'd love to be able to vet this, but that's like a cue, a strong enough of a cue for who is going to be one of these antlike people, one of these flaggots who just even in terms of being tactical about how you want to accomplish your political goals. Like, you're so wrapped up in the emotion of the group identity that you can't see it. I really do think it's these people who, as kids or whenever they play sports, they're just as invested in it when they're one of many team members as they are when they're just playing it one-on-one. Them against an individual opponent. I'm not saying the world's going to be paradise if everyone had the sort of individualistic ego that I do. Just like I'm not saying, if there's no more sense of there being such a thing as Holy Land, because there'd be no more religion, right? I'm not saying that absent religion, absent group identity, the world would be a paradise or anything close. But I do think right now, just in this last day, seeing the reaction, I think group identity, I'm going to put it on the top of my bucket list of kind of mental plagues on the mind of man. The biggest mental plague on the mind of man is this. And there's not enough people who just cut straight to the chase. This is brass tacks. I'm sure Sam Harris is going to release a podcast on this, but will he really drill on group identity as much as he needs to? No. But the quickest path to a rational opening for this discourse is just people need to feel it. And I guess for some, it's not going to come naturally, just like it doesn't come naturally for them to feel better about winning contests where they're the only competitor on their side and they're only competing against one other competitor. There's no other inputs. But I think the point can be made. It's just we need more people to make it. And then get into all the other kind of history lesson stuff. But if you don't do that as a first move, it's whatever other facts, they're going to fall on deaf ears. Because both sides have their impressive array of facts to bolster that very group identity. But also, I'm going to have to interject on myself and just read out some of the facts, because once you know the facts, you'll get more of a proper context for this, because it's all about the facts, what we know so far. So as of the 8th, it is 2,048 injured, 600 murdered, at least 100 taken hostage, 2 Israeli tourists murdered in Egypt. So that's just one of the things. I could have just flashed it instead of read it out, because this is so important. Even if you're not watching the video, you got to know where my mindset is based on the facts as they are right now. So with that, let me just also say that it's more about moral de-individuation than it is about the other terms I've gone on to use. De-individuation clinches it better, I think, than any other kind of term I may put on it. Or just as a merger of the other two, right? Leads to moral entitlement and then leads to moral whataboutism. Throw in de-individuation into that. De-individuation, mind you, is how we get riots from things as trivial as sports games and, these finales, the kind of stuff I did at least one video about back in 2011 when enough of the Vancouver Canucks fans lost their minds after the game.
because they lost in Game 7. So there's this moral de-individuation, and it's yet another thing to kind of underline my points as to why you're the dupe if you care about group identity. But yeah, those are some of the facts and figures. 600 murdered, I'm sure that will grow. But you guys can't have these fact-offs if you're going to get anywhere with each other. You can't have these, I'm going to call them fact-offs, where each of you spouts things that could very well be true, but you have different priority levels on it, so you don't even have to deny that what the other guy has said is factually true. You can just put it in your own priority list very low compared to what you're more concerned with. But you just got to realize the moral blind spots in all that. Because what you're probably concerned with at the root, it's hard to see, is that kind of flattery qua group identity. You should be able to see too many coincidences or too many seemingly absurd coincidences if you can't see that that's the way to undercut this discourse. To get any semblance of a step in the right direction toward the two-state solution, which is, I guess, it's just it's a LOL to bring it up right now, the prospects of that right now in that whole region. But really, you're just going to have to point out that even though you may be called an elite, someone who's looking down on the Volk, you have to spit facts on group identity and how demeaning it is. And the fact that it still holds so much sway over so many people in the current year. This is what I thought I fled. This is why I kind of don't want to return to the Balkans, because there'll be just too much. This group identity is mired in everything, just in terms of discourse. Just group identity is just going to be so presumed, and they're going to see me lack it and be too polite to challenge me on it. Because I want to be challenged on it because I believe I can go on the offensive. So the best way to go on the offensive in this whole discourse is to explain as vituperously as I did how demeaning it is. To the extent you're going to have an ego, let it be your individual ego. The more individualistically egotistical you are, the less of a fanatic you're going to be. This fanaticism, there is a pipeline between fanaticism and investment and devotion to group identity. You think of all the kind of zealous individualists, they were really only pocketbook individualists, and they weren't even that zealous. God, you think about someone like Ayn Rand, she didn't see the individualism to collectivism battle anywhere outside of her narrow legal and economic concerns. She didn't see it in the family. She didn't see it in all these issues that I'm going to go on to talk about. But she never demeaned herself by partaking in activism. No, she worked on the theoretical stuff and she refined it to the extent that she thought it was brilliant. I disagree. I don't think those arguments were all that persuasive insofar as now we're talking about pocketbook individualism as some core principle. It can make the world grow, that kind of transactional magic, that's voluntary transactional magic. That can make the world grow. It has made the world grow. But in terms of a core principle on how to structure society, I never found those arguments persuasive. But she crafted her theory as she saw fit, and all she was interested in is just refining it at that theoretical level. She wasn't going to demean herself by going around knocking on doors and persuading voters to, vote Iron. No, she was too individualistic for that. So, respect where it's due in these, pockets of her life. She wouldn't have caved to these kinds of narratives right now in the way so many other kind of American, certainly lifelong GOP voters who made a big deal out of minimal government. And then the moment it finally seeped in that the vast majority of GOP voters don't care about that, they're not fiscal hawks, they're not any of these things. They have other grievances in the way of free trade, what was known as free trade. The neoliberal turn. I hate the term neoliberal, but that doesn't really pull well. And so enough of these, free trade is a core principle. Enough of these lifelong GOP governors and senators and all this stuff, they've just kind of caved, and now it's buy American and it's America first. Whereas if Ayn had still been alive, she was an individualistic thinker. If she had still been alive, she would have said, how dare you say that I, as a free individual living in America, have to buy American? How dare you tell me that? How dare you not even grasp that there's a tension between consumer choice and buy American, America first agenda? She wouldn't have just caved the way so many other Well, of course she wouldn't have caved because she wasn't in the business of having to please that kind of crowd, those kinds of voting blocks. No, she just, wrote books, and more often than not, shitty books. But to return to the topic itself, grievance is not a moral excuse. That's kind of to summarize the video, right? Grievance, even if you can point to it being factually true, is not a moral excuse and does not validate de-individuation at the level of moral analysis. And it's just a sad state of affairs that needs to be uttered. But if people just had that truly seep in, that grievance is not a moral excuse to even just pivot away from the news cycle and to give history lessons. Like, aren't you clever? You can use Google and you can see what happened. Yeah, decades ago, we can all see what happened We can all do these Google searches to see the full story. And probably embellishments of the historical record, because, hearsay's got to comprise a part of it, I'm sure. But that's all background decoration. The core thing is grievance is not a moral excuse. People aren't willing to come out and open with that. That's a kind of opening. From there, the case for group identity pacifism, not individualistic pacifism, but group identity pacifism, is very straightforward in my view. And so a group identity pacifist is someone who, even if they believe that maybe their group that they happen to belong to on that phenotypic dispositional level, even if they find that group to be unfairly maligned, they won't experience emotions like fear the way so many of the other group identity slaves, if I may say. It's really, they experience fear at the individual level when they see their group targeted in a way that I just never do. And it doesn't mean you have to be an actual pacifist in your own personal life. It just means that it'll come naturally. Pacifism will come naturally at the level of groups. No quicker way to the two-state solution than in that way. What the hell? Let this be an under 30-minute video for the first time in ages. But I do have a lot of stuff I want to throw in, because pretty much for every minute I spend on X/Twitter, I have an additional thing I want to say. But I guess I'll just ignore all that right now, these little things I want to say, and I'll just say, if you came into this video expecting some geopolitical in-depth analysis, sorry that I disappointed you, but I really do think we need to get to this brass tack stuff in terms of people feeling ashamed when they even notice that little glimmer of an invite to a dopamine hit by way of group identity. I really think that's far more important than what someone like Robert Wright wants to talk about right now, about how we shouldn't lose ourselves in a over-dramatic, and not we, Israel shouldn't lose itself in a kind of vengeful, bloodlust, over-dramatic military intervention. All that stuff is fair debate. I'm very interested to see people debate that. But, as I hinted at before, that kind of debate is too reliant on facts. And I think people need to get to this priority differences stuff first before they get to the differences they might have over what is a fact and a non-fact. Right? And I guess that's one of the things that I wanted to have a take on after noticing on Twitter. There's people who are saying that there's just been more misinformation, is the term they use, or disinformation. I guess propaganda. They're saying Twitter is more riddled with propaganda. And these are kind of lifelong journalists and other kind of researchers who are really deep into geopolitics. They're saying just since the 7th, just the amount of sewage, factual sewage on Twitter has eclipsed anything that they've seen all their life long. So I'm feeling kind of powerless, right? And rightly so. I'm feeling kind of powerless from the standpoint of what are the most important facts that we can glean from this? It's like we're all swimming in kind of make your own adventure. The whole landscape, at least if you're on anything like Twitter, you're swimming in a kind of make your own adventure land. And so I think that even if you're disappointed that you didn't get sturdy geopolitical analysis from me, odds are if I were going to head in that direction, I'd probably just supply you with something that's not factually true. That's really hard to figure out why it's not factually true. Numerous people who are in that hole, whose job it is to tell fact from fiction, are pointing out how it's really hard. The difficulty level for assessing fact from fiction, according to all these people, luckily, I'm only seeing it through them. I'm seeing it indirectly. I haven't stumbled upon these oceans of lies pertaining to this incident.
and the fallout of it, but I'm just using them as proxies, the people I'm probably going to flash on the screen right now. It's yikes. Like if there were a difficulty meter for telling fact from fiction, it would have probably broken just since the 7th. But that doesn't mean that I am not inviting anyone to debate the facts in the comment section. I'm just kind of giving a justification as to why me, as risk-averse as I am, I'm not just risk-averse in terms of practical living and, for example, not wanting to go bungee jumping. See, that kind of caution that the average listener might feel in terms of, do you want to go bungee jumping or not? Do you want to go skydiving or not? I have that with commentary when the facts are as, when the dust is still settling, right? I have that in terms of commentary, and I think if you have it in terms of your lifestyle, you should also have it in terms of your commentary. You should be epistemically risk-averse. But I've been told that these two things are very dissimilar and that the analogy doesn't hold. But anyway, that's kind of my mindset right now. I just want people to I just want to bang the drum of boo group identity. But for those of you not interested in that, if you think there's a way to tell fact from fiction, and especially in terms of the prospects, right? Because the facts matter right now, not just for their own sake, but the facts matter right now because of like what exactly should Israel do right now? Like how important is it to just behead Hamas as an organization? Are we to be outraged at the Israeli government for missing so many red flags? Should Netanyahu resign? All these things are fact relevant, but probably the most important thing is just what exactly should the Israeli military do from here on out? Are there analogies to the overreaction in the wake of 9/11? Are there analogies to this right now? In terms of the innocent Palestinians who, we have to believe there's some number of innocent Palestinians who don't support what happened. But there's, if I'm reading the vibe right, there's a kind of bloodlust in the air that says that absolutely it's that important to take out Hamas right now, such that the questions about collateral damage in terms of Palestinian lives, that's very much a secondary question. And I think that if the gun to my head right now, I'm going to say no. Temperance should be where we default to, and collateral damage always matters. But I don't think that's, in the West, I don't think that's the vibe right now. I think the vibe is let Israel do whatever Israel wants to do and support them in any way we can. So I could be wrong on this. I want to hear what the people have to say, the people who watch me. Should we unquestioningly support any move the Israelis want to make right now, militarily? I wish we knew exactly what the sympathies were on the ground to not just Hamas, but to even more moderate Islamist organizations. I wish we knew on the ground. Because yeah, if 100% of the Palestinians are even mildly sympathetic, well, even then I wouldn't say collateral damage doesn't matter, because there's always kids, right? There's always kids who can't be blamed for their beliefs even. But one thing I absolutely won't say is that those who are not protesting are doing something wrong. Like the Palestinians who are not protesting this in the streets are doing something wrong. Because I knew if I were under a theocratic, totalitarian government that can just disappear me, I wouldn't protest that government. Unless I know that there's a high enough chance that by me protesting it, we can topple it. And yeah, Hamas is not the government there. I created that impression now, so just this quick tack on. Hamas is not the government there. I'm aware of that for Palestinians. Nonetheless, I think if you did a, kind of a global index for where is it safe and unsafe, where is it most safe and most unsafe to protest local government, I think pretty much any part of the Middle East is going to be in the bottom rung. Certainly not the top half. So yes, any part of the world where it's below that 50 percentile safety in terms of protesting the government, the only way I'm doing it is if you show me that there's a high enough chance that it's actually going to be pulled off. Because yes, I'm not one of the pawns. I'm not one of the lemmings that's going to render myself disposable for the greater cause. This itself ties itself into individualism. If more people didn't view themselves as disposable, as the peons,
these sorts of issues wouldn't happen, right? The more individuals don't view themselves as disposable, whether the cause is good or bad. You understand that, right? The more you view yourself as an individual, as a non-disposable entity, the less fanaticism there'll be in the world. It's why I see a through line between group identity and fanaticism. Obviously, especially the larger your group is, right? Because then there's always going to be a group member who's going to be imperiled, and you're going to see kind of a part of you imperiled because that's your group member, that's your fellow ally, right? Whereas if you don't care about territory at large, if you only care about your private property, to bring it back to territorial apatheism and then some of the other cool terms that I introduced in this video, group identity, pacifism, right? All of it just gets you further and further away from fanaticism. It's not to say that as an individualist, you'll never be vulnerable to fanaticism, but just the scope of things that can rile you up is going to be much smaller and narrower. Unlike, if you're some kind of patriot or ultranationalist or any of that stuff, right? Don't you see? If you say stuff like, I love my country, then the amount of things you'll be willing to do to defend that country and the amount of potential for the kind of outgroup that gets you riled up on an emotional level, just the potential for that is far greater because your country as a territory is much bigger than, your apartment or something that you actually own as an individual. It's going to get you out of trouble. It's going to get you out of all this, potential for disposability and potential for self-sacrifice. There's so much greater potential for that when you involve yourself on that emotional level qua group. I think I've made the point.